I might go into some of the fun things I did while we lived in Heber. When we first moved there, I bought an old Army Jeep from Spencer Auto, and we run it in the hills a lot. And it was, well, it never did break down, but I was always afraid it was going to break down when we get in the hills. So in 1960, I went and bought a brand new Jeep in Salt Lake. And I had a friend, Cott Glazier, who had arthritis terribly bad. And anyway, he was crippled up quite badly, and he loved to go in the hills. So he and I, and then we had another friend, Jay Hyatt, and we took that Jeep about 3 times a week and went on every road that was around the Heber Valley, up in the mountains, where you could see the valley. And we made a few roads of our own from one place to another, crossing some of those ridges. And so we spent a lot of time out in the hills. And that was a time there was so many deer in the hills. And so anyway, Jay Hyatt and I went out one day, and he took his rifle because he was always shooting squirrels or something. And we came into an opening, and there was a beautiful buck deer standing out right in the middle of an opening. And Jay said, "I'm going to shoot that deer." And I told him, "No, you weren't going to. It's illegal." And so he said, "Well, I'll just look at it through the scope then." And he looked at it a few minutes, and then bang, and down that deer went. Then he got scared. He said, "Well, we're not going to take it. We'll just leave it there. You know, you killed the thing. Now we're going to skin it out and take it home, at least not waste it." So we skinned the deer out, put it in the back of the Jeep underneath some things, and figured we'd get caught, but we didn't. So anyway, that was our outlaw experience. But we spent a lot of time in that Jeep, and we loved to hunt deer. On the regular season was a legal holiday for me. We just shut my operation down during that. I'd go out to the mill early in the morning and get things set up, and then we'd go hunt all day and then get back to the mill just in time to check it out and answer the calls I had that I needed to make. So we did a lot of hunting, and I took the seminary teachers every year out to hunt. And so we had a good experience with each of them. And then I took customers from California would come up, and we'd go out to hunt. And I did a lot of that. Well, that was good PR with the lumber company people. So we had a lot of fun hunting. That was a big item for us.
What did you hunt usually?
Well, where?
What did you hunt?
Deer.
Mostly
deer.
deer.
It was all
always.
deer hunting, yeah. We didn't do any elk hunting then because I had never seen an elk in the hills around Heber until about 1980 or somewhere before I ever saw an elk in the hills. Now, Dell tells me there's more elk in the hills now around than there is deer. So it's a different time now, but I don't hunt anymore, so they can have what they want. So my hunting experience, I have a deer head mounted that I killed down in southern Utah that would have, I think, rated on Boone and Crockett if I'd ever had it checked, but I never did. So anyway, I had that head mounted, and Dell, I guess, has still got it, I hope. So that was some of the fun things I did in the way of hunting.
What was your favorite gun to kind of use? Wasn't guns a big deal?
Well, I had an 30-06 that I was good at shooting it. And then I bought a smaller one, a 243. And that was easier to carry, and also
I'll pop this in his mouth. That'll help him.
I used that 243 quite a lot. But I still kept the .6, and I think probably Robert may have it now. I don't know who's got it anyway. But it was a good gun. I quit hunting after it got so I couldn't hike anymore. Is he okay?
He's squirmy. I can take him for you. It might help you. There we go. Come here, sweet boy.
But during the time that I hunted, I also, in 1968, I started to work with snowmobiles. And that's when they were first beginning to get popular. And I had some of the first snowmobiles in the valley. And Neil Giles and I bought 2 double-track snowmobiles, and we'd go into the hills. And at that time, we'd go in the hills and ride all day and never see another track other than our own. And so that was how crowded it was. And I then decided I wanted to be a dealer with them. So I got a dealership for Skidoo and for Polaris, and had that dealership for a few years. It was not a money-making thing. It was cost me money rather than making money, because people, the attitude they bought one from me, they figured they had a lifetime warranty on it. And I didn't argue with them, I'd just fix them. So anyway, I did a lot of the rescue work for the sheriff's office. Floyd Witt was sheriff, and when people would get lost in the hills in Wasatch County, they'd call Sheriff Witt, and when he'd call me. And so, because I had a double track and could go through the deep snow where nobody else could. And so I did a lot of rescue work. And I can think, I'll just tell you 2 instances. We got a call at 11:30 at night from Floyd that they had 4 people lost somewhere. They didn't come home. And so Floyd and I talked enough about it so that he knew what to find out, where they started from, where they intended to go, what time they figured they'd be back, and all. And so there weren't enough tracks in the hills, but what I could track them. But it was snowing so hard, it was hard to follow their tracks. But they told me they were going from mouth of Lake Creek to the head of Lake Creek, then over to the head of Mill Hollow, and then down to Anderson's Ranch, where the end of the oil was, where they plowed. So I knew the route they intended to take. They got to the head of Lake Creek, and I tracked them to there, and then down into the West Fork, and instead of turning to the left to go over to Mill Hollow, they turned to the right and went down West Fork. And I could see they had never come back out of the West Fork, so I knew they couldn't get much off the trail that went down West Fork. So we went down about, I guess, 8 miles. And there was an old cow cabin down there. And those fellas had gone down West Fork till they run out of snow. And then decided they knew were in the wrong place, so they turned around and headed back. And they ran out of gas just a mile from that cabin, but they had seen the cabin, so they hiked back up to it through the snow. There was about 2 feet of snow there, and stayed the night in that cabin. And we always, because I had a double track, I always had 10 gallons of gas on the back of it. So we went and shoveled them down and put enough gas in them, we figured, to get them back to their car. And we got most of the machines back to the car, and then I had more gas in the Jeep. We turned around, went back, and got the rest of their machines. So those fellas spent a comfortable night, not comfortable, but at least they were in shelter. So we got them back. And another time, Floyd called me and said that there were 4 fellows that had gone up from Anderson's ranch up to the head of Mill Hollow and were playing in that big flat up on Mill Hollow. And it got time to leave and they couldn't find one of their men. And so they came down and called after dark, and they hadn't found him, so they came down and called the sheriff, and so he got me in. He went one way up from Anderson Ranch, and I went up from the Lake Creek side to see where we could find him. And it was snowing so hard when I left Lake Creek, the mouth of Lake Creek there, till I hit the top summit of Lake Creek. I figured it had snowed a foot of snow. It snowed as hard as I'd ever seen it. And so I went over to, finally worked my way over to Mill Hollow. And by that time there was 18 inches of new snow. There was no tracks. And as I came up to the summit, I got just one whiff of smoke. And then I couldn't find it anymore. And so it was about probably 2 in the morning by then. And so I started to circle from the sign there at the head of Mill Hollow to see if I could find that smoke. And for an hour and a half, I made circles, one big enough so I could still see my track, and then go out enough, and another, just kept circling and wider. And I finally then started up on the edge of the ridge that went up about, I guess, 50, 60 foot higher than the flat. And I got halfway up that, and I got another whiff of smoke there. So I knew it had to be, he had to be close in that area. And so then from there I worked from that point up onto the top of the ridge and got over just far enough where it started to drop off the other side, and I could see the glow of his fire down in that canyon. So I shut the machine off and called and finally got him to answer me. And so I told him to work his way back up to where I was, because I couldn't get down in there to him, and I'd get him home. So he worked his way up and finally got up to where I was. So I put him on the back of the machine and headed, the closest place was down to the Anderson Ranch. And Floyd had never got up to where I was, so we'll find him down somewhere between here and there. So we went down the canyon towards, down towards the Provo River drainage, and just about to the bottom of the hills where the canyon came up, I found Floyd stuck in the snow, he and his son and another fellow. So we got their machines out and turned them around, and we headed down. And it was about, I guess, 8 o'clock in the morning when we got out of there. It was after daylight. And so there were a few relieved people to see that fellow. And so after I got home that day, I thought, and it was still snowing heavy, I thought, well, I'll just see how long that man would have been stuck in those hills. So for 3 days, I tried the best and hardest I could to get up to where he was, and I didn't get within 5 miles of it. The 4th day, I finally broke through and got up to where his machine was. So he would have been there 4 days before anybody could have ever gotten to him. So he would have had a very rough time because it was cold and snowy. So that was we never lost a person in those hills while I was there, that we didn't get them out either that night or by the middle of the next day. So we had a good success in the rescues. But our double-track snowmobiles were the answer to that deep snow. Those little ones just wouldn't go anywhere. In fact, the little ones wouldn't even follow the double-track in some places. I'd have to grade the hill. They couldn't go up it like I could, so I'd have to grade along the side hill till they could follow. So it was a fun thing. I enjoyed the rescue work. It was easier to go just with 2 or 3 of us than a whole group, because when you get a whole group, they get excited and having fun and running around in circles, and you can't track anybody because you don't know whose track you're following anymore. So we only went out, never more than 4, and whoever was leading stayed out front and the others stayed behind. So it worked out well on those rescues. So,
Did you ever get stuck in any big storms?
I never did get stuck out in them, no. No, I knew when that machine of mine was having too much trouble, I could turn around and follow my track back home. So I never did get caught out in the overnight. I put a tent up. I bought 21 acres up the head of Lake Creek at about 9,500 foot level. So it was up high in the mountain there. And I put a tent up, a 16 by 32 foot tent, an army tent. And I reinforced it with 2x4s inside so that it wouldn't collapse with the snow. And I've gone up there and stayed overnight in it. Quite a few times, Clara and I would do that. And I had a cook stove in there, a little sheep herder's cook stove, so we could cook in there, and we just really enjoyed that. And Janice, then after she came back from California, she went to California and worked. She worked in the LDS hospital in the computer department, and they built a new hospital in Anaheim, California. And they were looking for somebody to come run the computer department. And so she signed on to do that and moved to California and lived down there for several years. But when she came home, I closed down my sales of the snowmobiles, and I had 25 or 30 of them used ones. So she said, I'd like to set up over to the homestead and rent snowmobiles. So we did that. Janice run it. I maintained the machines and all, and she rented them out. And she had a couple of years left to go. She went to college for 2 years and then quit. She wanted to go back, so she worked 3 or 4 years on that rental thing. And we took guided tours, and I would take them, and she would go along when it was possible. And so she worked at that. And I'll just say she put herself through 2 years of college, and David and Dell then went on missions, and she helped finance their missions with that business. So, but I'll tell you, we took the governor of Oklahoma on a guided tour, he and his family. And then we had one other family along from San Francisco. And we took them, and what we would do, I call it a loop. We'd make a big circle and end up at the tent, and Janice then would go up to the tent and have dinner ready, and I would tell her what time we would get there for dinner. So she would have it all done, and she'd prepare it before we left. She'd make bacon powder biscuits before we left the home, but she'd bake them up there. And so for dinner, she had a big stew, and so they bought I think I'd say 2 or 3 pounds of beef and cut it up and so I went and got a couple more pounds. I like meat in my stew. So she had a stew that was out of this world. And she'd made some kind of a dessert roll to bake as well as the biscuits. So we had the stew, and Clara made green tomato, pickled tomatoes. And so she had a couple of quarts of those, and she had 1 quart and 1 pint bottle of strawberry jam that we had made. And she made biscuits enough for twice as many people as were there, she thought. And then those rolls, whatever they were, dessert roll. And when we got there, that governor of Oklahoma looked at the food and he says, "Who else is coming?" And Janice says, "It's just us." And he says, "Well, you got enough food there for twice the people that are here." And I told him, tell me that after we're through. They ate every bit of the stew, every biscuit. They cleaned up those tomatoes, and they ate all the jam on those biscuits. They'd cover the biscuit with a 1/2 inch thick of jam. And there was not one thing left. And that governor looked at me and he says, "I don't believe it." And so about a month later, after that, taking them on that tour, I got a big, nice package from him, from the governor of Oklahoma. And it made me an honorary colonel in the Oklahoma National Guard, with all rights to wear the uniform and to wear the emblems and on all official occasions, it said. Well, I never had occasion to do it, but I had that certificate, and to my knowledge, it still exists, but I don't know where. So that was an interesting thing for me to have that, to be an honorary colonel of the National Guard in Oklahoma. So, shut it off. I'll go in and explain one of my political fiascos, I'll call it. And I don't remember what year it was, but anyway, we were having trouble in Heber Valley with Provo and the lower valleys closed their beer sales on Sunday. And so a lot of people drove up to Heber to buy their beer on Sunday. And so a group of us decided that wasn't what we wanted, because they drink their beer, throw the cans out along the road, and the road between there and Provo was strung with beer cans all the time. So we got out a campaign to eliminate the beer sales in Heber Valley, or in Wasatch County actually, on Sunday. And we campaigned on that. We got petitions out to people, and we ran into a lot of friction among people in the valley that were non-LDS people organized against us. And they made me, this was started in I don't know what the official term was, but anyway, it was a group organized to improve the life in Heber Valley. And they made me chairman of the committee to eliminate the beer sales. So there was a lot of publicity on this, both in the Salt Lake papers, and we had a friend bring a paper from Connecticut back to the valley, and it had our story in that. So we got national coverage on it. And it got to be important enough that I had 3 threatenings on my life over it. One was a local fellow that was a young fellow that was kind of radical, and he ran the stop and go gas station and beer joint, or beer sales anyway, in the valley. And so he was wild against us. And there were several local people that had been in business and were no longer in business, but they did a lot of campaigning against us, and we did them. And one of our local attorneys was against us. And so we got it put on the ballot, and he wrote up the wording on the ballot. So if you were for it, you voted against it. And if you were against it, you voted for it. Well, you went in and read the ballot, and are you for the referendum to stop beer sales? So yeah, put yes. Well, that meant you were voting against it. And so we lost it. But in the process, I had 7-Eleven and those organized big companies. Anyway, I had a group, and I say a group, there were two fellows in a big black Cadillac come up in their black suits and told me to drop it or they'd find me in the canal. And I told them, well, I was a good swimmer, so they could just go ahead and put me in the canal. And he said, if I put you in the canal, you won't swim out. Anyway, they drove off, and I didn't stop campaigning on it. But we lost it because of the wording that attorney did to get it. I'd asked a lot of people how they voted. Oh, we voted so that they'd close it. But they voted so that we could keep it open. So that was an experience. I decided that was all the political thing I ever wanted to do. So.
What about any stories with the grandkids of going up the mountains? Did you get taking the grandkids up to chop wood or?
Yeah, Liz mentioned going up and cutting firewood. I took Dell's boy, Robert, David's two boys. I think Dell was with us. And I think Sterling, Lynn's husband, was with us. Anyway, we went up to cut firewood, and Clara fixed a lunch. And what she ended up doing was grinding wieners up and making sandwiches out of them, putting lettuce and pickles and whatever else in it. And really good. So when I passed these sandwiches out, I handed one to Robert and said, here's your sandwich made out of dog meat. Well, I meant hot dog meat. But Robert looked at it and, well, I'm not going to eat that. And he wouldn't eat the sandwich, no matter, even though he knew it was a hot dog. I told him it was dog meat, so he wouldn't eat it. Anyway, when he got home, he went to Grandma. And he says, Grandma, next time you fix a lunch, put me in a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't want any dog meat sandwiches. So that was fun. But anyway, when we fell a big tree, and I mean it was about 2.5 foot through, I thought I had everything out of the way. But I had the lunch container sitting off to the side, and the tree didn't obey my orders, and it fell and landed square on top of the lunchbox. So it mashed the lunchbox, but it didn't destroy the lunch. We were still able to eat it, but the lunchbox was long gone. But the kids, especially Sterling, had never seen a big tree fall. Now this tree was, I'd estimate, 100 feet tall. If not, it was close to that. Anyway, and when that big a tree hits the ground, it bounces and makes a crashing noise. And the trees we fell were dead, so that there was no needles on them. They were big spruce trees. So they made a spectacular sight to see one fall. And so Sterling had jumped up and down and was so excited. So anytime we went to get wood, he was ready to go help. But we cut the wood, then brought it home and split it up. I had a fireplace and Dell had one and David had one. So we'd go get a load of wood for each of us. And we did it. Then that was up above by Mirror Lake when that instant. Then we wanted to get lodgepole pine. The only place we could get lodgepole was out above Roosevelt. Well, Roosevelt was 100 miles away. Then we went back 40 miles into the mountains to get the lodgepole. And so we used to go there, and Nancy's husband then at the time would meet us and go with us up there, and he'd get a load in his pickup, and then we'd load my pickup and trailer. So we did that for several years. And so I decided I didn't want any more of that. So when I built the next house, I put a gas furnace in the fireplace. And David did the same. I think Dell's still got his wood burning, but we don't go get wood anymore, so I don't know what he does. That was a fun thing, to go into the woods and cut the trees down and cut them up into length and block them and then put them in the trailer. But the kids had a lot of fun. They'd load the trailer while I cut them up into length. So they did a good job, and it was fun to work with them.